Okay, lovely. So, hello everyone. My name is Marek, and I will be today's host of this webinar with our esteemed guest, Mirjam the Klepper. What will be happening today? So, first, we'll start with a short UX Tweak introduction for those who do not, as of now, know what a UX Tweak is. And then Miriam will have her presentation, and afterwards we will have a live Q&A with Miriam as well. So let me first start with the quick introduction um, about UX Tweak. So what is UX Tweak? UX Tweak is a UX research platform, first of all, where you can test any aspect of your product, starting off with organizing your content with card sorting and tree testing. Empathize with the users by utilizing our preference test or 5-second test. You can ask simple questions using survey. And if you want to, you can test any aspect of the usability of your product, be it mobile, prototype, website, or just first click. And if you want to schedule a live interview with your participants, you can use our live interviews for that as well. As I mentioned, you can test on any of the product types, website, mobile, prototype, and we also offer option to recruit participants to any of the study types in UX Week. With recruiting with us, the quality is guaranteed. The recruitment is possible for any study type, and we cover with our panel basically the whole world. And what we take pride in is offering free, fair incentives to all the participants after they participate in our studies. With this in mind, you can recruit, conduct, analyze the results all in one place using our UX research platform. If you like this webinar and you would like to have some additional content about UX, make sure to follow our UX Geeks podcast hosted by our colleague Tina. We are running on more than 50 episodes with people from the whole UX research and UX design industry. And each episode brings tons of interesting insights from these esteemed experts. But now it's time to introduce our guest for today. Hi, Mirjam.
Hi, Marek. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, the sound is lovely. Thank you again for joining us today. So, Mirjam, you are originally from Netherlands, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. But I've been living in Vienna for quite a while now, over 10 years.
Yeah. So it's just behind the border. We are based in Bratislava, so it's not that far away. In your career in UX, you have some experience from My Sugar, Clue, and currently are freelancing, mainly focused on B2B. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So I started a little bit in more like the startup scene. And from there, I went to companies that were in the process of becoming more established. So My Sugar is one of them. I joined them just after they got bought. And then for Clue, the same thing. And then after I left Clue, I went into freelance basically. So yeah, I do a lot of B2B, a little bit of e-commerce, but I really enjoy B2B because you just work with more complex products, which I think is quite relevant for today as well.
Of course. And what was the reasoning for actually choosing UX as a career path, or what took you here?
Coincidence, I think. So I have a background in social and cultural anthropology, which of course sets me up for qualitative research quite nicely. And basically through joining, the startup world here in Vienna, which is not particularly huge, but I was quite interested in it, and I entered from a social impact side. But through that, I learned more about working in tech, and I worked for different platforms back then. I did my own thing for a bit, and as I went, I realized that figuring out how people use technology is actually a profession. And through that, I was like doing it before I realizing I was doing UX research, so to say. So I was working on a neighborhood platform for a while. That's where I started to think about, okay, how do the people that are on the platform, how do they interact with this? What can we do as a company to improve that interaction, or to stimulate more interaction there? And through there, I realized that UX research is an actual field. And then I was lucky enough that my sugar at the time took a chance on me and brought me on board. And there I really learned a lot really quickly and grew into the field, and also started focusing on medical devices, which is also a branch of UX that brings with it its own complications and complexity. So then I was really getting into it and becoming a proper UX nerd, per se.
So even though you called it a coincidence, it seems like quite a journey.
Exactly. If you look at it backwards, it always seems to make sense. But trust me when I say that at the time, it didn't feel like a chosen path. Right now, I go about it a bit more consciously, but at the time, it was really just, it just happened, so to say.
And you're also connected to UXCon Vienna, which is, I think, from where most of people will know you. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if people know me per se, but UXCon is, of course, a very big conference nowadays, focused at UX and UX research specifically. So we started about 4 to 5 years ago. I met the founders in a different setting. So I wasn't doing UX. I was working for a very short moment in time in event management. This is where I met Andreas, one of the founders. And once I switched to UX, I realized, oh, there's so much going on here that is actually really interesting. But Vienna has, aside from the UX Vienna community, there's not really an international thing going on, and I worked for a big company at the time. My sugar had plenty of budget also to send people to conferences and learn more and build that community. And I felt that Central Europe at that time didn't really have anything. So I spoke a lot with Andreas about it, and with his extensive experience of organization of events and conferences, this is actually a really good idea. Let's see what we can do. And that's how UXCon was born.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if there is anyone who wasn't yet to UXCon, I'm sure it's a trip worth a while. So that would be enough for me for now. I'll leave it all to you, and we can all look forward to your presentation on the topic of the task analysis. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Marek. Okay, I'm actually almost surprised that such a large amount of people signed up. I don't know how many actually actually showed up now, but it was quite cool to see that people care about task analysis, or at least think they might care. Because one of the things that I learned over time is that thinking about what it is that users actually do with your products is actually really important, but somehow often forgotten to think about. So this is why I suggested Task Analysis 101. Because in my opinion, it does matter, and there's a way to go about it in a helpful way. So what will we exactly do? What should you expect? I will quickly talk about who this webinar is for to begin with. It could be that some of you are actually this might not be this maybe is not actually for me. You have the chance to jump off any time, also with my permission, so to say. We'll look a little bit about where task analysis sits in the landscape, what a task is to begin with. So this is quite a basic class, right? So if you're like, oh, I've done this 1,000 times, maybe this is not the webinar for you, just to be clear on that. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper at what a good task analysis looks like, and how you can improve maybe the practice that you already have, and of course how it can help you working in those cross-functional teams. So this is for you if you are generally unfamiliar with task analysis, if you're new to the field of UX, for example, or if you are not really working in UX, but you work with a lot of people who do. So say you're a product owner, a developer, a QA, whatnot, business developer, and you want to understand better what UX is about, then this is a good session to join. However, if you are in UX and you've gotten there by not by coincidence like I did, but with a background in human-computer interaction, in ergonomics, in human factors engineering, then this webinar will not be so useful for you. Or you might be like, oh, this is so basic, right? So if that is your background, sure, you can join and let me know later where I went wrong maybe, or what I can improve. But your value out of this webinar will be not as big as when you are rather unfamiliar or new entirely. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Yeah, so feel free to jump off, obviously. But of course, I'm happy if you're staying here and listening, and hopefully also interacting a little bit in the chat in a bit. So, what are consequences of not doing a task analysis? First of all, what often happens when people do not talk about tasks exactly or as detailedly as we will do in a few minutes from now, what happens is that within teams there is misalignment on user needs and requirements. So this means on the one hand that you will have developments that are based on assumptions rather than on actual data, and which is of course always the case when you work without user research, but task analysis brings its own angle to that. And what could happen is unnecessary feature creep. So if you don't really know why people are there and what they're trying to do and in what way they're trying to do that, you might start building things that are actually not necessary for people to reach their goals. Similarly, if you have this misalignment within your team already, this could also lead to inefficient communication and inefficient collaboration. So it could be that there is quite a bit of misunderstandings. You might end up building the wrong things, and you can have endless misguided discussions because nobody's really talking about the same thing, right? That's a big problem. And this actually happens. So if you're like, I don't know what she's talking about, this happens. I have seen organizations where, in my freelance capacity and also beyond that, just talking to other people in UX, where a product owner might come in, roughly describe what they want to have, but actually nobody in the team really understand what the product is even doing, right? So these kinds of situations can happen when people are new to an organization, if there wasn't any proper onboarding, if teams are like jumbled around and kind of lose sight of the mission. If you then also not understand, especially if you work in complex products, if you don't really understand who the users are, what they're trying to do, and how they might move through your products and your features, you're going to have a problem. And it gets really hard to have that communication and to get that clear. So for me, a task analysis, and again, I will explain in a second what that is exactly, can really help improve that communication and make sure that the team is aligned because you all understand the foundation of what it is that you're trying to do. Of course, if you don't do that, we see this misalignment, we see ineffective or inefficient communication and collaboration. And of course, that has an impact on our user in the end, right? So you end up with interfaces that might be unintuitive, experiences that don't make sense or that lack essential interactions. And you also, even if you've identified all these things, it's really hard to see where to change them because you're lacking this baseline or this foundation of what it is that people are trying to do. And then it gets really hard to get to a place where you can go into corrections. So I see that in the chat there's a question what the worst consequence of not doing task analysis is. In a nutshell, building shitty products and wasting, company money on doing that, having ineffective meetings, going around in circles. I think it all kind of comes together. Now, as a UX researcher, of course, I will say that about most research methods. Any team that goes up without research or without thinking about what it actually is that they're trying to accomplish, they will run into these issues. With task analysis, we really look at those issues from really based in the product itself. So yes, having a strategy and a vision in a company or knowing what it is in what direction you want your business to develop, that all also feeds into those issues. But task analysis and really understanding at a deeper level what people are trying to do with your product and how they move through an interface or even a service, that can really lead to these kinds of issues. So there's not one worst consequence. It's a mix of different consequences that will ultimately just lead to, a waste of money and everybody's time. I hope that answers the question for now. So let's look at where task analysis sits in the research landscape. And I hope that this graph is kind of familiar to you. So when we talk about research, right, we always see qualitative methods and quantitative methods, and we see this difference between attitudinal research and behavioral research. And task analysis kind of builds the foundation for these two areas that I've highlighted here with the circles. So task analysis helps us to understand what people are doing, and it can help us to understand why people are doing that and how to fix it. So that means that if we look at this map from Nielsen-Norman Group, that task analysis, like I said, is kind of like a foundation for things like usability testing, A/B testing, and concept testing. So all the things that are really about testing the product and how people might interact with it. Now let's look at what task analysis really is, right? So in the most simple definition that I sort of came up with myself, if you think it's not good at the end, then please let me know. But ultimately for me, a task analysis is breaking down the steps that a user needs to take to achieve a certain outcome by means of a product interface. Yeah, so it's looking at more specific steps that a user needs to take to achieve a particular goal or outcome. And of course, the only means that they have to do that is with our product in this case. Now, there's two types of analysis in task analysis. One is hierarchical, where we simply focus on the different steps that are needed to complete the task, and the structure or the sequence of those steps. This is what I also do most commonly. But the other side of that, or like another way to approach it, is a cognitive task analysis. And that looks more at, the knowledge that people have, the thought processes, and the decision-making steps that might underlie users' actions. We will get to that. We will see some examples of the difference in a second. But roughly, you could already say, like, this is the difference between if I'm buying a pair of pants online, am I just describing the kind of steps that I need to take to click, or am I also looking at the decision-making process that might be underlying where I'm clicking, which pants I'm looking at, and so forth. Now, what is a task anyway? So we've seen there's different ways to analyze it, but what is it actually when we're talking about these tasks? This is a very ugly graphic that I find very useful nonetheless. It's talking about PCA, so perception, cognition, and action. And basically what we see here in the top half, you have the user. The user needs to do certain things. And at the bottom half, you have the device, right? And in between that, you have your interface. So your device can be a shop or like whatever underlying product you have. And the interface is the parts that a user can interact with. So from this interface, I might receive information in different forms. This could be just visuals, this could be text, this could be any kind of other thing. If we're not talking about screens, it might also be buttons that are labeled and whatnot. I need to perceive this information, right? I need to be able to see and perceive in whatever other forms there are this type of information. I need to process it, and then I will usually take an action. And my action will go back into the device or the system again through the interface, which will, create some sort of reaction from the device, which will lead to an output, which then again, I need to perceive, process, and take action upon. Now, what does that look like more up close, or what are some examples that we can see there? So if we talk about PCA, perception, that part is about the senses, right? So what, like I said, what is some information that I'm seeing on a screen, on a label, on a button? Is there anything else that I can hear? Alarms, warnings, clicks, beeps, melodies in some cases. Is there anything I can feel that gives me information that I also need to work with? Then cognition. Here we go into the part of reading and understanding what I'm seeing, being able to interpret or distinguish, or also recall information from the past, knowing the information that I need to do the task or recall a process. I need to compute maybe something, maybe I need to calculate something, transform something in some form process, and then I need to decide. And once I've decided, I again probably take some sort of action, right? So I might be touching or pointing at something. I might be, if I am talking about a physical product, I might twist something, I might press something, I might, have to move something or look at another screen in order to do something. Or maybe I even need to apply force in order to get to something. And what is always important to keep in mind is that all of these things always happen under the conditions of stress, maybe fatigue, noise, chronic injuries. So this is kind of specifically something that I've learned in the context of making these medical devices, right? Where maybe our our users are working in an ambulance or a trauma helicopter or in an environment where there's 10 patients and they all have different screens and things beeping at them and trying to get the attention of the nurse or the doctor and that is there at the moment. So that all feeds into how we can see a task and under what conditions those tasks are being carried out. Now, in both of these models, right, I talked about hierarchical task analysis, I talked about cognitive task analysis, and now I talked about PCA, which is kind of the foundation of both. However, these terms kind of come from different fields, right? So cognitive, and this is why I put this there, cognitive can be interpreted in different ways. So when we talk about perception, cognition, action, there we're kind of more talking about the understanding of the action that needs to be taken, right? How do I interact with that device? I need to click add to cart in order to move forward through the shopping process. When we talk about cognitive task analysis, we're talking about a different type of cognition, right? We're saying this is about what are the considerations that I need to, go through in order to accomplish a goal. So how, for example, do I make this decision on which pair of pants to buy in this case, which is different from how do the buttons work, so to say, different type of cognition. Good. Now let's look at some examples of task analyses. So first example, hierarchical task analysis, buy pants online. Task, buy pants from the website, steps, log in, 2, find pants, 3, purchase. I would be curious to know from the people that are listening in, what do you think of this task analysis? Is it good as is? Does it need any improvement, or are you unsure? There will be a poll in the chat for you to interact with. And of course, also feel free to share your thoughts. That went pretty fast. 75% of you thinks it needs improvement. I agree. What about this one? So we have a task. This time, again, it's about buying pants online, right? I have a login, find pants purchase, but for those, I have different steps and details. Go to the login page, enter a username, click the login button, then subtask for find pants, use the search bar to type pants, browse through the search results, select a pair of pants that you like, purchase. How is that? Good as is? Needs improvement? Unsure. Please also feel free to, interact with that poll again, or to also share your thoughts in the comments there. Okay, the polls will take a while, but they'll be there in a second. This will give you some time to think about it. All right. So 55 of you say it's good as is. Okay, let's keep that in mind for now. It might be good as is, but let's take a closer look at these two tasks, log in and find pants. Because you could also go about it like this, right? We can dive a little bit deeper. Logging in might mean, okay, I need to navigate to the login page, do a bunch of things there. I need to enter my credentials. I need to, type in my email and my password. If I cannot remember, I might need to select forgot. Then I need to recover it. Again, I need to submit credentials. Like once I've entered them, I need to submit them. There might be an error message. So we see that we have like a new level of detail here. Also for find pants, I need to initiate this results, right? So it's a bit more than just use the search bar. There might be other things here. Initiate the search, filter results, quite a few steps under that actually. Select a product, view availability, and so forth. How do we feel about this task analysis? Good as is, needs improvement, or are you not sure? Let's see, the poll should be in the chat. I'm expecting the results to come back in a second. Just going to give you some time. Feel free to also write your comments in the chat. They will be transferred to me or transmitted to me shortly after you write them. Do we have any outcomes for the third example already? Okay, 83% of you says it's good as is. 79% says it's good as is. Okay. I agree that we're definitely getting into a good direction here, but we're just going to explore a little bit further, yeah? So this was still a hierarchical task analysis. We've looked, now let's take a few steps back. So we've seen this. We're now back to the more basic version. And I want to highlight this part. So when we are saying select a pair of pants that you like, and a bunch of you said, okay, this is already quite a good analysis. Select a pair of pants that you like. What does that mean exactly? There's actually yet another world behind that, right? So we can go even deeper. We can really say, okay, in order to select pants, I need to click on the product. Then I need to, go through all these different steps, navigate, identify an appealing product, select a product, trigger a product detail page. And we already see that in the details that navigating through results actually includes, a lot more. It's navigating means, okay, I need to filter, I need to scroll, I need to look at multiple things. Identifying an appealing product can also mean, okay, I need to visually scan all the different thumbnails. I might need to hover to see different things. I need to select one, then go to a product detail page. Then I might want to look at more images. So behind something that in our more basic one looked like something pretty done, select a pair of pants, easy. Behind there, we actually find way more tasks that can influence the outcome of your user flow ultimately, right? Now, I see that the fourth poll has gone out. How do you feel about this one? Is it good as is? Does it need improvement, or are you unsure? Or is it overkill? We didn't put that as an option in the poll, but if you do think it's overkill, you can, of course, also write that in the comments. I'm waiting to see the results. Okay, good as it's for 72%, but not everybody has voted yet. Of course, you also don't have to, but I would be curious to hear your thoughts. And some people are starting to feel like maybe it could be overkill. Okay, I get that. We're talking now about the selecting pants, right? And the reason that this is so detailed is because if we look, for example, at A/B testing, like we see later, we will see that all of these different steps will impact, if people are converting or if people are moving through your flow the way that you want it. So it might be overkill in some environments, but in a lot of environments, it can actually be helpful to go in this direction. I also see that people's level of confidence in their own assessment of these task analyses is a bit changing. Before you were way more clear about, okay, yeah, this is definitely good, or no, it needs improvement. Now we're getting a little bit unsure, which I understand. Good. So we have seen now, if we only look at hierarchical task analyses, we have seen different ways to do it in different levels of detail. And it depends on the product that you're building, in how far it makes sense for you to go to this level of detail. Say that you're building, say that you're doing e-commerce, right? You might be in a situation where you're like, oh yeah, I'm building e-commerce. We're following a lot of standard patterns, right? So we're just following, best practices for e-commerce. So everything should be fine. We don't need this level of detail. That might be true to a degree, but if you're seeing that you're actually not converting people, you're not selling as much as you thought you would, then it might be really worthwhile to really look into the details here. Are your features as good as you think they are? If you're really taking the time to analyze them, right? If you really go through it step by step and kind of put on this first time user brain, this is also where cognitive walkthroughs are very helpful, right? If you do that, in how far is this actually easy for people? Or did we not think about it well enough? Did we feel that we implemented best practices, but actually we missed a few details that actually make it harder to go through this? This is why a task analysis can be really helpful, to really look at these different steps again. Even if you are in a business where you're doing things, based on best practices and you're just building yet another web shop, so to say. However, if you're working on highly complex products that are, B2B, specifically for organizations that do something very specific, say, let's say tax management and accounting, right? I don't know how many, and there's like tons of rules and regulations around it, and you might need to structure it in a certain way, or maybe accounting software, right? There's a lot of different things that flow into that that I personally, and as I've seen also a lot of other people in UX, we don't necessarily know exactly what it is that people are doing with this. We don't know exactly what the flow is or what their workflow looks like. We don't really know the context in which they're operating, because we're not tax accountants, right? We don't work with this on a daily basis. We're building the things. So in those situations, it can be really helpful to just take a moment, go back to the drawing board, and really think, hey, what is it actually that people are trying to accomplish on one side? And do the steps that we have designed for these people, does it match with what they're trying to accomplish? Or is there maybe a mismatch in how people move through the product and the flow that we allow them to move through in our B2B product? Is that actually aligned or not? And you will find that surprisingly often it's not aligned. That's why it's good to pay attention to detail. Right, so that is looking at things from, this purely structural way and this hierarchical way. But when we're talking about selecting pants, there might be some other things that you want to look at as well, right? So, and this is where we get to the cognitive task analysis part. If I'm talking about selecting pants and I'm talking about it purely from this other perspective, I might only think about clicking the things, right? User has to click here, user has to make a decision. We might say that, make a decision, but it's not really elaborated on. Whereas when we use a cognitive task analysis, we get the opportunity to think about that a little bit more, right? So when we say, okay, select a product, we see, sure, there's a step that is simply, again, review product listings, click on product, analyze product details, check reviews, compare options, decision making, right? So they seem like simple steps when we just list them. But behind that, the cognitive processes that are behind that are way more complex, right? So when we talk about reviewing product listings, this means that I need to perceive visual information, and I'm looking for specific cues, right? I'm looking for patterns, maybe I'm looking for a specific brand. I need to click on something then because I have decided that I want to investigate further. Then when I'm doing that, I'm also processing all this information. When I'm actually trying to make a decision, I might have things in mind like prices, comparing different types of colors. Is this blue the same as this other blue that I saw on this other website? So all of those things come into play. Am I there? Like, how quickly can they be delivered? Am I there? What do other people say? All of that is cognitive work that is behind what we ultimately can only measure, in our heat maps and so on. We can only measure it as clicks or as, converted or not converted. And we need to start to think about what is happening exactly. So on the one hand, with our hierarchical task analysis, we're looking at, okay, where are they dropping off, or what is happening? What is the flow? And are there any issues with that? And if we expand that with a cognitive task analysis, we get to put on this other set of glasses that makes us look beyond just what is happening on the interface. And we look a bit more at what are the thoughts that people might be having. And those thoughts might go really fast, right? And they might not be so explicit. But if there's a mistake in our design, or if something is not following a pattern, then, for example, reviewing product listings can be a lot more tricky than it seems, right? If we do that wrong. And we'll get to that in a second. I mentioned before PCA, and this is kind of where these two frameworks come together. Although, like I said before, this cognitive part of perception cognition action is a bit more focused on just understanding the interfaces rather than looking at the decisions behind there. What we see there, for example, and this is something that I quite commonly use, is that I combine these, right? So I really look at, okay, what am I perceiving? What do I need to recognize? What do I need to do? And then what is it that I will actually do? So this is where it more or less comes together. And it's up to you, like depending on what is it that you're trying to accomplish, which one of these methods is most appropriate for you. Are you just looking at the structure? Are you trying to identify different moments of decision making and cognitive processes? Or do you need a little bit of both? Now, what I have done in the past is go even deeper. Can we make it more complex? Right. Yes, we can. There you go. I hope this is not too much of a shock. So these are actually, this is the one on the left is the first one, and the one on the right is a continuation of that. But what I've done here in this table is I've added yet another layer, right? So we have our perception, cognition, and action. For the sake of, keeping a clear eye of what we're talking about, I've added a user goal. What is it that they're trying to do? Beyond clicking, they might want to find out specific information, detailed information. And what I've added here, and this is where it also becomes more and more important for development people, for QA people, and obviously also for designers, is looking at the system response. So in this case, it's kind of basic, right? But it goes into like requirements. So if I need to, as a user, review product listings because I want to quickly identify a product that meets my criteria, I expect the system to have thumbnails that layer quickly, that are clear, that are high end, and that I can see pricing, for example. This is what the system is giving me. Putting these two together, what is it that we're trying to do? What might be the goals that people have? What is the action that they're trying to take? Plus, what is the system response? What is the system offering me at that moment? This can help us to identify potential issues, right? So we can see here, if I have way too many options available and I don't have a good filter, this can be a complete overload and lead to choice paralysis. If I need to choose the perfect pants from 500 pants, I'm kind of going to give up, right? Because we all know this bias of choice paralysis. And so this can help you already in a very dry, I admit that, very dry way to uncover these kinds of issues. And this is a little bit what we also do in medical device engineering, or from a UX perspective at least, where we look at, okay, what are the things that are happening? How is the system responding? And then what are things that can go wrong, right? So what are maybe issues that are living in the interface, and what are issues or predictable use errors that can occur based on this match of PCA and system response. Seems like a lot of work for no reason, right? Luckily, we have multiple AI tools at our availability these days, and I think that really helps. So I didn't, make this. I didn't spend, hours making this as I used to. I told ChatGPT, listen, this is the product that I have. I want these in these columns. Please help me, to identify potential things that could happen. And of course, if you have visuals already available, you could potentially also feed that to the AI that you're working with. Of course, you still need to think for yourself and like check it and complete it, or like take out the things that are bogus, but it offers you a good foundation to go through that. Still seems like a lot of work. aren't we supposed to all work in tech and be like, do everything quick and dirty and just a few post-its and that's fine? Sure, in some cases that can be totally fine. In other cases, it really pays off to lay that foundation and do the groundwork and be really detailed. Now, why is that? If you have those precise tasks and if you really looked at it from different angles, what is happening in the structure, how are people feeling about it, what happens in the system response, things might go wrong, this is already helping us to really understand what the user is going through. It will improve communication about features and functions to the whole team. Everybody will have a better feeling about what it is that we're talking about, and it will enable you to find exact location of usability issues that might have happened in your UI or UX. Let's have a look at a video and imagine that, and you might have already seen it, but even if you did, imagine now that the daughter on the right is a stakeholder, say a product owner, communicating with the designer who in this case is designing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Sorry, I had to make it extremely specific.
Oh, good. I'm starving. Take 2 pieces of white bread out of the bag. Take the lid off the jar of peanut butter. Get a butter knife and stick it inside of the peanut butter jar. With the knife, scoop a bit of peanut butter out of the...
That means like a lot.
A bit means a lot?
In my world.
Spread your scoop of peanut butter onto one of your pieces of bread with the knife. All right. There we go.
You're doing better than before, though.
Open the jelly jar. Squeeze it onto the other piece of bread.
No.
Done.
I would be very curious if this kind of communication between product owners or business developers or whoever it is that brings in new features into the team, how much that communication seems familiar to you if you're working in UX. I have seen things like this happen for sure. So why do task analyses matter and how do they help avoid situations like this? Aside from helping understanding what the user is going through, so in that case we have we're building empathy on a more detailed level because we're really stepping into the shoes of our users as we're going through this analysis. It helps us to pinpoint pain points, so we can find out these small obstacles and potential areas of confusion more easily. And it gives us insight, especially for you CTA, in like underlying behaviors and thought patterns, right? Like how do people make decisions when we give them this amount of information at any given point? In terms of team collaboration, if you have clear requirements, if everybody's clear on what it is that you're trying to do, you're reducing ambiguity for everybody, right? So if the product owner knows exactly what it is what we're trying to do and what the user wants to do, if the developers and the designers know exactly what users are trying to accomplish and what that might feel like when we're actually going through the process, and we write that down and we pay attention to detail, that will ultimately just lead to better discussions and refinement. You will have easier tickets, right? It's not like, oh, you have like your basic backlog with some basic tickets there, and then you look back later and you don't really understand anymore what these tickets mean because you weren't clear from the beginning, right? So having a clear understanding how people move through your product really helps have better tickets, better discussions, and that will ultimately help you also improve your prioritization in the backlog. And finally, it really helps you to find the exact location of any kind of usability issues that you might run into. So if you're making B2B tools or actual, products, it can help you to find the root cause of things because something might have happened earlier down the line throughout this, set of tasks that lead to confusion later on. That's one part of it. And if we talk about, for example, e-commerce again, it can also help you to make better A/B tests, right? Because you can really pinpoint what in all the things that people need to do, what is it and where is it that you want to make a few tweaks, right? And it happens quite often in companies that A/B tests, even though everybody knows you shouldn't do it, A/B tests kind of include everything. Or we're going to change this word, and we're going to change that button, and we're going to change this header image, and we're going to just change all the things. And then it's super hard to find out what actually has an impact. So don't do that. And on top of that, be very precise, right? So have a clear insight in how people move through your product, and then tweak one thing and see how it impacts everything else. And if you have a clear sense of what are the little steps that people need to accomplish to get, to their outcome, if you have that, it's going to be a lot easier to design these tests and also to measure the outcome, and like to have different types of tests and compare all of those and really see, okay, where in this process are we going? Are we going wrong? Where can we help people make this or that decision slightly easier? Where can we make the text a little bit bigger? Does it have to be everywhere? Is there a specific point where people are missing information? This is why it's helpful to have task analysis. Questions?
Okay, so Miriam, thank you again for the lovely presentation. I know you have mentioned at the beginning that it's more focused on people who are not as familiar with UX research and UX approaches, but in my opinion, it's the strong foundations that we can build a proper research on. So I think it's really important that everyone has this in line. And we can start off right away with the first question. When should we use HTA and when CTA?
I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like what I said earlier, if we want to see where interfaces are not helping people to accomplish tasks, this is where HTA specifically is helpful, because you will have a little bit of that cognition in there, but you're a bit more focused on the structure and how people move through things. I think cognitive task analysis, on the other end, is mostly helpful to really try and understand how people are making those decisions, right? What kind of information do they need? This might be, I think, more relevant in an e-commerce setting, like how do people make decisions? What kind of information do they need? Might be a bit more relevant there than, in a product that people have, very clear ideas about what they're trying to accomplish, and the product just needs to facilitate that. So I think those are a bit the differences. Yeah, on the one hand, you have a concrete product that people need to work with, and you need to make sure that it's easy to flow through that. Or you have a different type of product or shop or whatever, where it's more about, okay, people need to make a lot more decisions on the next action, and we need to know what is influencing them in those decisions. What kind of thought processes might they have there?
So the rule of thumb is, if the decision making is the front point for the user, it should be more focused on the cognitive, and if not, it should be on the hierarchical, right?
Well, ultimately, you need both, right? So let's take a medical device example again. So I worked for My Sugar, where people needed to track, where people use the app to track their insulin intake, their they might note down how much they're eating, when they're eating. So on the one hand, there we have a flow of taking specific actions, but we might also want to motivate people in general to use the product to begin with, right? And this is where the cognitive part comes in. Like, what can we give them to make it more interesting for them to use the product? Whereas if I make a B2B tool, people are going to use the product anyway. So we just need to help them and guide them along this specific flow, so to say. That's what I would say now. If you ask me tomorrow, maybe I give you a different answer depending on what I've been doing this day. So if anybody has a different idea about that, then please feel free to also share it with everybody else, and jot down your thoughts on that in the chat. Usually I have a little bit of both, right? Like, what cognitive things, what decisions do I need to take in order to make my next move?
Okay, thank you for that. I think that was a good answer. And now the next question that we have: what is the difference between task analysis and usability testing? I feel like we look at the steps users take during usability testing as well.
Yeah, that's true. To me, a task analysis is the foundation of your usability testing, right? If you can lay out exactly how people are going to move through it, it's going to be a lot easier to say, at step 1.5, we're losing a lot of people, right? And then you can know exactly, and you can communicate with your team, at this particular step, we need to do something. I would find it really hard to do usability testing without having a clear structure of these tests. So again, especially in medical devices, we had a lot of the tool that I worked with most, or the tool that we were building that was the most complicated, it was often the case that people had to do something in the settings of that tool that would impact the outcomes of working with the tool afterwards. And if I'm just looking at usability testing, right, if I'm just throwing this tool that we're building, if I just throw it to a bunch of participants and I kind of see what happens, it's going to be a lot harder to analyze why things are going wrong or where your issues are with usability testing. So in order to do a good usability test, especially for more complex devices, you're going to need a task analysis, because otherwise it's just going to be so much harder to identify what you need to change.
Yeah, so the task analysis eases the scoping of the whole testing for you in the most complex versions of the testing, basically.
That as well, yeah. So writing down exactly what people need to do can help you identify, okay, which are the tasks that I need to test. And then in looking at the outcomes of the usability test, it's very helpful to have this task analysis so you can exactly pinpoint where the issues are. So yes, the difference is that the one thing is an analysis that I'm doing myself to understand what we're talking about as a team and what we're working with. The other hand is the other side is, translating those tasks, or like having your interface then that is tied to a task analysis and testing that interface with users.
Okay, I think that sums it up nicely, so we can move forward. What is the most important thing you learned while working in the medical devices field?
That task analyses matter. I say that, of course, as a joke, but also that is actually it, right? So I came before from an area where, we build things fast and we just like kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what happens. Granted, we were maybe also not the most experienced team. And working in the medical devices field really forced me to take a moment and really think about, what is the things that people are actually trying to do, and like really write that down in detail. And I always would, come across things that wouldn't really make sense, or where maybe we forgot a step. I mean, not maybe completely forget, but paying attention to detail in a world where everybody wants everything to be fast and quick and dirty. That was the most important takeaway from working in medical devices. And documenting stuff. If you take a decision, write down why you took this decision, right? And make sure that everybody is aware of that, because it could be that, will be transferred to a new platform or a new group, or maybe teams are being switched around, and then these new teams, they don't know why, that you've thought about why the interface is the way it is, right? And if you don't document that, they might go off and like change everything, ultimately, completely disregarding everything you've learned in usability testing and that you've documented in this task analysis, because they don't have that background information. So work more detailed, make everything traceable, and be transparent, and make sure that those handovers make sense.
Well, in my opinion, it can be kind of liberating to finally have the option to take a while for think everything through in detail, because as you mentioned, in this day and age, everyone wants everything quick and dirty, without any delays, ideally, even though delays often come anyway. And it can be rather liberating to have enough time to actually think in detail about everything, if this is the way you prefer to do things, of course.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that, right? Like this point of delays. I think a lot of these delays that happen in product development is exactly because people didn't pay attention to detail to begin with. So I have been working with a client, and they have quite a complex product, and the design, and they have a limited design team, and they have at least 10 different products in their portfolio. And it's really, really complex stuff. And these designers, great and fantastic as they are, they don't always know what it actually is that the user is trying to do. They don't always know who is it that is using it. They don't know what they want to accomplish. And then a product owner just writes kind of a ticket, yeah, please build this, and we want a blue button at the bottom, and it should do this. You can imagine what kind of interfaces come out of that, right? Because, exactly, but it happens for real. Which was also shocking to me to like find out that not all companies pay this level of attention to that, and that they don't always communicate very well. And I think a task analysis can really mitigate that, and ultimately will save you time in a quick and dirty world, just by making it slightly less quick and slightly less dirty.
And when you choose to delay the process by focusing on the details, it's a delay that you have chosen instead of a delay which came out of the left field and you did not expect it because you did not choose the delay at the beginning to do the proper analysis.
Exactly. And it doesn't even have to be a delay, right? It really depends on how your team is set up. If you have the luxury of having a dedicated researcher in your team, this can really help with, it's not a delay because your researcher can start this work together with the designer and the product owner already a little bit in advance. So then when you go into, this refinement meetings, everybody already can start off from a more clear picture of what it is that is actually happening. So it doesn't slow the team down if you have dedicated roles. But of course, if there's a product owner who has like a gazillion things to do, and then you tell them, oh, please also make a really detailed task analysis and a requirement framework so that we know exactly what's happening. Yeah, that's when it's going to go in a different way. Because I've never met a product owner who has time to sit down and focus unless they're absolutely forced to, right? They move fast.
But we got a reaction to this discussion that we just had from the chat. Avoid future miscommunication in advance. I think that is a key takeaway from what we just discussed right now.
Absolutely, yes. Happy you picked up on that person in the chat.
Okay, so how is the task analysis different from the user flow diagram? Is it sort of the same? Does the task analysis come before the user flow, or is the flow just a visual representation of the task analysis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So again, I've been in places where user flow diagrams weren't even used. So there was no documentation, there were no task analyses, there were no flows. The product just kind of exists, and then a designer is kind of tweaking it, and nobody else has access to what is actually the entire picture of the flow. I'm happy that this is not the case for this particular participant in the chat. But I wanted to clear it up that sometimes neither exists. If you do have user flows, that is great. And yeah, you could say that a task analysis is, a very wordy representation of your flow. The thing is, what happens if you start to describe a visual flow and you start to, you really have to pay attention. And of course, as a designer, you're probably already doing that, right? Like you look at a screen, and I think in most cases, especially, you might have developed some blindness for your own design, but in most cases, you have a pretty good grip on what it is that needs to be happening and how people move through it. However, if you then want to talk about it, that becomes a little bit different, right? Because then you have to verbalize all the things, and you really have to go through it step by step. And that is what a task analysis is doing. It's like it's analyzing this flow, right? And it's translating that into a different type of information, and that helps you analyzing what is happening. So for me, like without having this task analysis, I can stare at a screen and like roughly understand what it means, but it can be really hard to really understand or analyze what it actually is that is happening and in what order, right? So a screen can look really nice because it kind of has all the right elements. But if I write it down, it's like, oh, I do this, then maybe it can become clear to me that, oh, the way that the screen is organized, even though it has all the things, is actually not helpful in, accomplishing the outcome that I'm trying to go through. So it's two sides of the same coin, and it depends a little bit on how your brain works, which one works better for you. But I can tell you that if you make a medical device, the FDA is going to want to have, a written out task analysis. And especially with products maybe that are not only, digital, maybe there's a second device that, needs to communicate. Especially then, of course, your user flow diagram is not going to be enough because people need to step away from the device, do something somewhere else. And this, of course, you can capture a lot more easily in a task analysis. Or you can also capture it visually, of course, but in a task analysis, you will then have, there's also freedom in words. Visual is great, but words do also provide meaning and can be a helpful tool.
I wanted to highlight the point that you made about the cases when it's not solely focused on one device, on one digital device, those task analyses. For example, this can be when a user is using a sensor their arm to monitor their sugar levels,
Mhm.
and it's communicating with their mobile phone. How do you visualize that easily? That's
Mhm.
rather complex. It's much easier to describe it in words and to put it in the task analysis for better understanding. So that would
Mhm.
be a highlight for me as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and now that I think about it, I don't have much to do with it, but I can also imagine that for, service design, where a lot of things are actually not taking place in a product, but it's more about services and people understanding where to go and what to do. For that, of course, a task analysis can also really be helpful.
And we got a reaction from chat that it was a great explanation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always, a bit nerve-wracking to improvise answers to spontaneous questions. Thank you for appreciating them.
Okay, and we have a few more questions, just one or two because of the time running
Mhm.
slowly out. Uh, when you add the cognitive and emotional layer to it, it also sounds sort of like a user journey mapping are just the equivalent tools that lead to the same result, or are there any big differences?
No, I agree with that. I also like as I was making this presentation, I was also thinking about this that of course a user journey where we talk about the different touch points and so forth, that is in a way also a cognitive task analysis, right? But it has more elements. So it's kind of a more sophisticated way of a CTA maybe.
Mhm. Okay, so that will be the last question actually that we had. So we are just in time, and it's been a pleasure, Miriam. I think that everyone who joined us today took something away from the presentation, and let's hope that it will help people to stay more organized and find the results of the research easier. Are there any key takeaways that you would like to highlight for people as we are signing off, or you can also shout out any upcoming projects that you might have on your own?
No, that's okay. I don't have anything exciting to share aside from UXCon, of course, in the fall. Um, no, like I said, I think ultimately the main takeaways is that paying attention to detail pays off in the end, and as researchers and as UXers, we should make use of any tool that we have to facilitate that.
I think that's a short and sweet summing up of this, that it pays to it is worth it to pay attention to the detail. So again, thank you everyone who joined us today, be it in the morning for you or in the afternoon, wherever you joined from. We are happy that you took your time to join us today, and I think everyone who joined took something away from today. Again, Miriam, thank you for joining us today. And everyone, have a lovely, lovely remainder of the day. Thank you so much.